Hello, welcome back if you know who I am. And if this is your first time, hello. My name is David. I make videos talking about media that I enjoy. This is my thoughts, ideas, and theories video for episodes 25 through 28 of the Magnus Protocol, which is a horror podcast written by Jonathan Sims and Alexander Day Newell, directed by Alexander Day Newell, produced by the Rusty Quill Company. And I am just reviewing what happens in the episodes, giving my own thoughts and ideas, divorced of what the fandom is saying. So these are all like raw theories from my own brain. Obviously, I will be interacting with the fandom and seeing their theories and ideas, but this I want to be a record of my true unfiltered ideas, thoughts, and theories for the Magnus Protocol. So let's begin. Case notes, episode 25, Gut Feelings. CAT 2RB 2474, followed by dates. The description of the episode was food, parentheses, gorging, dash slash dash, compulsion, parentheses, disgust. And just as a reminder, the CAT number at the beginning of every episode stands for category 1, 2, or 3. Category 1 is an agent, such as an altered person. Category 2 is an subject, such as an altered space. And category 3 is a catalyst, such as an altered item. So this episode's category 2, which is a subject, it's going to be the Hungry Man Grill. And it's rank B. I do not know what the ranks are. That's what RB is. It's rank, letter. Don't know what those mean yet. The DPHW is the 4 numbers after the CAT letter, R letter, and that stands for death, pain, helplessness, and weird. So they're ranking them. So for this episode, death is 2, pain is 4, helplessness is 7, and weird is 4. The date listed in the case was February 7th, 2024. I don't think if I mentioned it later, but like the actual event itself happened a week prior. So there's that. And the date of the catalogization is April 24th, 2024. The author of this case and this episode was Jonathan Sims, edited by Alexander J. Newell. The air date was August 8th, 2024. Brief summary, disgusting restaurant plus Colin goes crazy. And the possible entities, it's corruption. It's not even up, like, it's corruption. So in scene 1, Sam and Alice are talking to each other, and she's relieved he's safe. Like he comes to work from home, and she's like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're safe." Celia is running late. Sam says that she has a childcare emergency, which is an excuse that she's had prior, considering she has a 1-year-old named Jack. During this conversation, Sam compares Alice to a guard dog. They're like joking about it, and Alice mentions that Gwen is in a meeting with Lena, and as they keep talking, they get interrupted by Norris slash Martin, who begins reading one of their cases. There's no delineation between Alice and Sam talking and the case. Usually the transcript shows like a line to show that the scene moves on. Uh, but it didn't show this here, but I'm just gonna say this is the next scene just to make it like look good in notes and stuff. So in scene 2, it's the first email we see is a reply to the second email. In this first email, it's from Tom Connolly, who's the editor of Muse 9 Publishing, who's sending email to Kieran Hart, who's requesting a redraft of the Hungry Man Grill review. Some of the things he notes is that it's too anecdotal. You're talking too much about like getting there and not like the actual food. He says he's too similar to Hieronymus Bosch, which is a painter, and that just means that the writing is very surreal, fantastical, and disturbing. He was also it's unclear about the location where it was, and he asks if Kieran's planning to retire, and he wants to call and talk to him. And the next email that we see is the original email that Tom replied to, which was Kieran, who's sending in his new entry for Dirty Eating, the Hungry Man Grill in Newham. This is like a guy who's reviewing different foods, and so this is his review of this restaurant. So he says he doesn't really remember when it was added to his list, And he really does not have any notes for it either. And he didn't think it was weird until like after the fact. The restaurant itself was found in an alleyway that was hard to locate in the first place. And the alleyway itself was narrow and steep, and it was slick and oily cobblestones that were stained by fat that was leaking from maggoty trash. Ugh. He's starting to feel very, very hungry despite having already eaten, because what he wants to do is to eat before going to one of these reviews so that he can control his hunger. And if he doesn't want to eat anymore, he won't have to because he already ate. And he compares this feeling of hunger, not like the simple sort of hunger, like, oh, I need to eat, but this is like a horrible emptiness that needs to be filled. And then he gets inside, and it's old and dirty, and there's other people eating. There's a lot more details that I don't care to write about because they're not really important to like my notes and stuff, but also like I don't want to revisit those details. He's compelled to sit at an empty table, and he says he notices two things while he was waiting for food or something like that. He notices two things. It smells really bad. The description of the smell is also a lot more detailed than what I have right here, but yeah, it smells really bad. And two, he notices the other people that were there are thin and ragged, and they're open. Some of them are openly weeping, and they're eating food with toothless mouths. Uh, while he's waiting, the chef walks out, and he just looks like a normal man who's just covered in grime and ooze, and serves him food. He gets served three courses. The first course was, I guess, the appetizer. He named the courses. I forget what they were. The first course was soup with wriggling noodles, that were noodle insects, and oily soup. Ugh. Okay. Second course. I literally just ate before this too, so now I feel the second course was a burger with bad burger beef and a bun filled with weevils. Okay. Jesus. And then the third course, he declined to describe it. It was an ice cream cake. He didn't describe what it was. He was like, I'm not going to tell you how it was, but it looked like an ice cream cake, and I could barely eat it. And I'm like, thank you for not telling me these details at least. I love ice cream cake. I love ice cream cake, and I do not want that to be ruined for me. After the dessert, he says he still feels hunger, and he knows that the chef would continue feeding him, and so he manages a way to leave. And a lot of the idea of like Magnus Protocol, Magnus Archives is dream logic, and it's sort of like how could he have left if the others didn't? And it was because I feel it was because he recognized that he already finished all of his three courses and he could leave now, while the others probably didn't realize that or something like that. Um, but yeah, he escapes. And it's like a week later, he's writing this review, and he can still feel the food inside. He can still feel the insects in the gross food inside his stomach, trying to fill him. And I think he says he still feels hunger. I don't remember that. And the last thing he says is, "A meal in the Hungry Man Grill will stay with you until your dying day." So in scene three, Alice and Sam compare what they just heard to the student union cafeteria while they were in college. And while they're talking, Colin appears. Yay! Colin's back. Right when I think it was Sam who was like, "Oh hey Colin." The moment that he says Colin, there is an ominous sound. Ha! And Alice is like, "What are you doing with a hammer?" And Colin begins destroying computers. He's trying to save them from, quote, the nightmare machine, and says it's listening. And they both try talking him down, but he keeps destroying different computers. Eventually, Sam tackles Colin, which ends up destroying the recording computer that's recording what's happening. And we hear this like really nice, like powering down sound that I like a lot. In scene four, Lena berates Sam for tackling Colin. The police have arrested him by now, and she says that 3 computer terminals were destroyed and there was a damaged server rack. Uh, Gwen's there. I forgot to mention Gwen was there. Gwen tries fixing what they have and says that the server damage seems to have been just superficial, but she's no IT expert, so she doesn't really know. Lena tells them to clean up, but Sam wants to discuss Colin, but Lena just sort of downplays his concern and says, well, we can't do anything. We have to fix everything first, and then we can like discuss that, which is sort of like we're never going to discuss that ever. And she says she will begin looking for a new IT person to replace Colin, and then asks about Celia, and Sam says she's running late, and she tells Sam to warn Celia about the absences before she gets fired. And Lena tells everyone to just go back to work, and she tells them to have no more heroism because she does not want to do any more paperwork. I had pasta sauce on my face, and no one told me. Y'all didn't tell me. I should have looked in the mirror, but no one told me. Anyways, in scene 5, Celia buys a ticket for a bus. She says a coach, and I was confused at what a coach was because it was in train stations too. But I think it's a bus. She's very tired, and the attendant there, who's voiced by Mark Nicholson, asks if she's okay and tells her to rest when she gets home. And Celia like leaves, and she says to herself, "Yeah, right," in a very bitterly, which is telling of something. And notes: Sam and Alice are better together now. Smiley face. I talked prior about how Alice's character was really interesting because she was turning into somewhat of an antagonist towards Sam's like story. But I saw how what she wanted to do contrasted with what Sam wants to do. Now that we have her talking to Sam, now they're on much better terms and now they're working together. And that's pretty good that we saw that happen. It feels really nice to see them talking and joking again once more, even though it was very interesting to see them at each other's throats. The next day, it is the next day. It's last episode, episode 24, raising issues was the day prior, and so just tracking movements. Sam and Celia went to see Basira, and then they went home, and then Sam went to the OIR, and it's I guess agreed that Celia went back home, and now with what she was dealing with, she's heading to the OIAR, which is why she's getting to London. Also, because it's a night shift, the attendant thought she was getting home. Oh, I forgot about that. But yeah, it's just tracking the movements of the characters. Gwen's working with Lena about the ministerial visit. If you remember from last episode, Lena said she would allow Gwen to continue being an externals liaison after she helps with the ministerial visit. Alice says the minister as a specific person, and it's like I thought there were multiple ministers. Unless it's like a specific minister, then that would be someone of note. I don't know yet. It's coming up. It's coming up. The Hungry Man Grill is corruption. It's cut and dry. It's bugs, filth, ooze, etc. And I don't really have much to say about the case in of itself. It was pretty gross. And I remember in one of my writing classes, I wrote a story. I didn't really like it, but it was like a guy who was possessed by like nature and he was trampling around the forest and was just seeing disgusting things or whatever. And I was like, I don't like this. And my teacher was like, it's okay if you don't like it. This is learning experience. Someone in my class, I think it was my teacher or student, said a quote from what's his face, Stephen King, that was like, if I can't horrify, I'll terrify, and if I can't terrify, I'll disgust. Disgust. That's it. Whatever. And so I feel like that's what they were trying to do here, and I think that disgust itself is a very interesting like feeling because it's very corruption, obviously, and so I sort of like try to think of like the fear of the corruption, filth, insects, and stuff like that tends to be a feeling of disgust, and how that is connected to fear. And so, like, I didn't write it down here. Like, the disgust of this man for the things that he's eating is an aspect of the fear. But he wasn't actually feeling fear, I don't think so. Or at least, maybe there was a moment of fear when he knew that it was coming, that he was going to get more food, and that's when he was able to get out. But more than anything, it was always just feelings of disgust. So So Alice and Sam talk about their uni days after, in regards to this episode, and so this is now getting into some form of a critique for the Magnus Protocol. These next few bullet points are my critiques on the Magnus Protocol, because last video I talked about how I missed that the Magnus archives would do research on the things that they listened, that they heard, but the Magnus Protocol doesn't really do that. But that's not so much a critique in that I just liked how they did in Magnus archives, and they're just not doing that in Magnus Protocol for like obvious reasons, especially because a lot of these cases tend to be things far in the past or things that are like not investigatory, and everyone, the meta knowledge of the world is that these cases are real, but the people who are listening to them, at least at the very beginning, didn't believe them. And like there's obviously going to be cases as well that are not real, which are the ones that we don't listen, that we don't hear about, similar to in Magnus archives how the cases that were easily digitized by John were not the ones that we consumed. Every single story that we listened to in the Magnus archives was real. And so the same sort of idea here is that every single case that is read out by Norris, what's his face? Norris. Oh my god, I forgot his name. I want to say Jordan, but that's not right at all. Chester and Augustus. The ones read out by Chester, Norris, Augustus, and have voice acting are all real, and the ones that are not, that we don't even get, are fake, aka the one mentioning about like dolls in the first episode. And so the thing is, for me, it would have been really cool. It would have been really interesting if if Sam and Alice, having just heard this episode, if they maybe just looked into Muse 9, which I think is the publication service, is what it's called, uh, or Dirty Eating, by Kieran, and looked into it, since it only occurred like 2 months ago. Like I said, the cases are real, but they don't really have a connection to the characters' worlds past like mentionings of them. For example, in Magnus Archives, there are mentions that John had previously encountered Lightners. There was historical mentions of the cults and when they died and stuff like that, or actual like investigations that they do, and they don't really find anything or whatsoever. Like I said before, this world, the premise of the OIAR in of itself, it's not investigating, it's just recording things that have happened. And so I don't need them to be investigating. However, I do kind of want to see ripples of the cases in real life, for the world. And some examples that I thought of that'd be really cool would be like Madam E, who I looked up, had 137.4 thousand followers, and Hilltop Center, and like the episode of Saturday Night. If we would have had at least one or two mentions of like, hey, I remember Madam Eve dying, and this is really interesting that we get this unpublished video of her passing away. Or of Hilltop Center, oh my god, I remember that fire that happened in Hilltop Center. That was really sad that that building got burnt down, especially because it was charity. Or for Saturday Night, oh yeah, I heard that there was a murder that happened in the strip club down the road, but like everyone just said it was a altercation that went wrong or something like that. Something, just one line mention that the thing that we saw in the cases that we know are real to actually have like affected some part of their world. Like I said, 137.4K followers for Madame Electra, and our Jesus, our characters. The biggest thing that that case had in effect was to comment on Alice feeling bad after encountering the drowned woman. And so, like, obviously, there are some times that this happens, mainly with like Lady Mowbray and Inksoul, where like they come back, and obviously, we're not going to get any of this sort of like world, the characters' worlds being affected by like older statements, older cases like solo work, or like contained events like raising issues, like things that happened in the past or things that happened to individuals, obviously are not going to have huge effects in the world. But for things that like do seem to be affecting the world in of itself, I want to see it reflected upon the characters. Otherwise, they just seem sort of disconnected from everything. And I don't want that feeling. I want to feel like the cases, yes, are real, and yes, they affect something. They do something. Colin's back. That's great. I am missing some forward reasoning for Colin. You know, in a previous video, I laid out the last few things that have happened with Colin. In episode 3, putting down roots, Alice was worried about Colin and asked Sam to report him to IT. And in episode 5, personal screaming, Jesus, and 7, give and take, he was locked in his office to avoid electronics and then was sent to therapist. However, I need, like I said, just like 1 or 2 mentions of him noticing that they are listening, because we go from him fixing the JMJ errors and dealing with, oh, the electronics are like weird or bad or like they're not working how they should. And like we got in the first episode that the source code was written in German and he was trying hard to understand it. He learned German himself, and it was just really complicated issues for a weird system. And then we jump straight to they're listening in, and let me do a Scottish accent. They're listening in. Nope, let's not do that. He's like, they're listening in, and the computer's listening, la 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 la. And we agree with him, obviously, because of the meta knowledge of the story. Yes, the computers are listening. We are listening to them through the computers. They don't know that we're listening. You know, in Magnus Archives, John and whoever was talking into the recorders to us. For a good majority of it, it was John talking to whoever would replace him. Sometimes it's also just base researchers who want to look at these cases and stuff like that. I mean, later on, it gets just the recorders have a mind of their own, but it is very much like we know that they're listening, but I need in story how he knows that we're listening, or else it just sort of sounds unreasonable. And the way that the story is handling it, we're not supposed to think he's unreasonable because we are the people who are listening to him. Even if you don't know anything about Magnus Archives, just what is showing in Magnus Protocol in and of itself. We know that what he's saying is true. If there's no reasoning as to why he thinks the computers are listening, then he sounds unreasonable to us, even though we know he is reasonable, you know. And the thing is, Sam and Alice, I have to add Alice in like little like note there, but Sam and Alice both have had examples, and both have seen an example of the computer listening and responding because of their listening, aka feeding Sam statements that relate to what he just talked about. However, Sam and Alice are so divorced from Colin because at that time he's already saying that they're listening. And it's like, I just need like 1 or 2 lines or an interaction where he notices that the computers did something because they were listening. We're supposed to suspect that it happened off camera. I don't think that's sufficient enough for the jump from being slightly like annoyed at how the computers are working to being paranoid enough to want to destroy the machines. I'm missing that sort of forward reasoning as to like why it begins in the first place. And I feel like they're relying too much on the meta knowledge of the readers to be like, oh yeah, obviously he's going crazy because he's being listening to he knows that the computers are listening to him, and we know that as the audience, and it makes sense. But I just need that in story reasoning to show that the computer is listening and he finds out about that, which leads him to getting this sort of moment of anger, of paranoia, of destroying computers. And finally, Celia traveling makes her tired. It's similar to 17 Saved Copy, where the guy travels, Darian was it? Traveled and he felt like really, really bad after the fact. But since she's traveling between worlds, allegedly, from the Magnus Protocol to Magnus Archives using the Hilltop Road dimension hopping, it makes sense that she's getting a little tired of it, especially if she keeps doing it so many times, like she mentioned. But yes, that was the end of this episode. It was a pretty simple, cut and dry episode. And, should I do a transition? Let's do a transition. I will see you all for episode 26. Haha, transition. Hello, we're back. I forgot to mention, I have a replaced line with merry-go-round. That's it. And I've had some additions to my bookshelf. I recently finished Number 9 Dream by David Mitchell, who also wrote Cloud Atlas, which is one of my favorite books as well. Flip around. There we go. And it's about a young man leaving his island in Japan to go to Tokyo to try to find his father. And weird stuff happens. Interesting stuff happens. It's really good. I really liked it. And also joining in the family is The Honeys by Ryan LaSala. It's about Mars, who's Mars is the main protagonist, who's gender fluid, and their sister Caroline passes away, and so they go to the summer camp that Caroline has been going to try to figure out why she died, and starts interacting with the Honeys, which is the group that the group that she was like hanging out with a lot. And it's really good. I loved it. It's a horror, young adult horror, and it's very corruption, but also like vibes of like The Eye and The Hunt and The End, and it was so good. But yeah, those are the new additions to my bookshelf. Now, to what we're really here for, episode 26, Catching Up. CAT 1RBC 4463 dash the dates. The description was exhaustion, parentheses, athletic, dash slash dash, compulsion, parentheses, tape. Category 1 is an agent, the archivist, and rank BC. The DPHW, death 4, pain 4, helplessness 6, weird 3. The date of the event happened April 14th, 2024, and the date of the categorization is May 5th, 2024. The author of the case is Muna Hewson, who I believe is part of the Silt Versus creation team. This aired August 15th, 2024. Brief summary, the archivist, and Helen. And the possible entities are the Eye, the End, and the Hunt. In scene 1, we begin to hear like booting up sounds of the computer, and it's very slow to boot up too, which is obviously a remnant of the computers being absolutely trashed by Colin, the last episode, Colin and his hammer. Sam and Celia are finishing their caseload, that's it. And Sam very briefly critiques Celia's categorizing as they're getting ready quickly to leave and speak with Helen Richardson, because they found her. And Sam is like normally nervous, and Celia is very nervous. And Sam doesn't want to have a dead end again, like the last few times. And Alice appears, probably in the break room, and she like doesn't approve of them doing their investigating. And but she's like, I know that like what I want is not exactly what you guys want, but at least be safe about it. And Celia shows off a large knife. So she definitely got protection there. And scene 2, also there was when Alice was like wear protection or something like that, or bring protection or something like that. That was a joke, obviously, for condoms. And Sam was very mortified, and then that's when Celia pulls out her knife, and that was really funny. That was really good. But anyways, scene 2, Chester/John reads out a witness statement of Alexander Rumens, whose age is 23, who is an accountant in 17 Grandson Avenue, Hackney. I don't know why that address is important, but I wrote it down just in case. The witness statement was taken April 14th, 2024, as I said before, and he has two sisters, an older and a younger sister. And the dad died at 15 years old. His mom is still alive, etc. That's just basic details that he gave for some reason during his witness statement. Basically, about him. He saw someone die yesterday. His name is Jared Smith, who was an athletics coach when Rumen was younger. And he basically pushed Rumen to run faster and taught him to be better at running. And they trained like 3 times a week, and like they went to races and everything. And then there one day when he was training, his sister appeared. Rumen's sister appeared to tell him that his father was either dead or dying. Mr. Jared appeared at his house, but Rumen didn't really respond. Like, he knocked at the door, but Rumen didn't want to go out. So Jared left, and that was the last time he saw him. And then he like fully stopped running, and then became an accountant to take care of his family. And now, like, skipping forward a few years to like the now, Rumen's like walking one morning, and he sees Mr. Jared jogging in like a park near where he works. And he looks like he was running for his life. He looks scared, and Rumen wanted to help him. And so he figured out that he was running laps, so he tries to intercept him. And at one point, when he does intercept him, he feels like it either like he gets run over by Mr. Jared, or Mr. Jared just passes right through him. He's not fully sure, but it's really fun sort of imagery there. And he sees his mouth moving, and it looks like he's telling some awful story. And so eventually Mr. Jared falls and hits his head hard. There's a big gash on his forehead, and Rumen runs to try to help him, and he hears some words that is being spilled out of his teacher's mouth. And the words are, "They're coming now and getting close, so very close, and when I slow and when I stop, they'll catch me and they will hurt me." And he doesn't know what he's talking about. And then all of a sudden, they are not alone. He sees a figure who's tall and thin in the shadows, who's holding a tape recorder. And it sounded like a tape recorder up to the mouth of Mr. Jared. And he asks, "What are you?" or "Who are you?" And the thing just says, "An archivist." And after that, Jared screams, and like his mouth tears wide open, just ah, and like that makes Rumen scream, and then he passes out, and then he gets woken up by a paramedics, and that's when the case ends. In scene 3, Alice is slightly disturbed by the case, obviously, because it's another appearance of error, which we now have a name for as archivist. Gwen comments on it. She also says that it's no use to obsess over it because there's a lot of monsters anyways. And Alice is like, "I'm not obsessing over it. I'm just angry that there's no code for archivist." And she keeps repeating archivist. And she sort of like realizes, and it's like, oh, she remembers the name tag that they saw when she and Sam went to the Magnus Institute ruins. That was like AR or ARCH. And they were trying to figure out, I was like, oh, is it Archie? What? It's archivist, duh. And so she realized that her and Sam set the archivist free. And so she calls Sam because she needs to tell him about this. So in scene 4, this is after conversation, Sam's feeling guilty. He's like, if we didn't do that, there'd be people who will alive. And Celia says that it's definitely weird, and she feels like there's something off. And Sam has her clarify, and she says the archivist is not acting how she expected. And when Sam asks for another clarification, she begins to say, but Helen interrupts. Helen Richardson, voiced by Imogen Harris, appears, and she's like, "Hi, how can I help you? I'm a realtor." And Celia is just kind of spaced out, and so Sam has to be like, "Hey, Celia, come on." And yeah, so Helen begins to realtor them, and she shows like little bits of Tory sentiment. I'll talk about it later, but yeah, Celia like interrupts her. She's like, we're not looking for realtor. We're asked, and she asks her. She gets straight to the point and asks her about the Magnus Institute, and she says she does remember it, but she thought it was closed, and she describes it as an academic outreach and a quasi NGO. She says it. I think she was like a Krango or something like that, which I looked up. It just means like a quasi NGO, like non-government organization or something like that. Yeah, and she says that she worked with them like a long time ago, helping them find some commercial properties. And she asked them, like, what is this about? And so Sam and Celia both lie about them working for a documentary. We're going to make a documentary for the BBC, and they're doing early research for the documentary. They're not really sure if it's even going to go through or not. And so Helen says that like the Magnus Institute had some like odd requirements for locations, like big basements and security options, which makes sense for like what the Magnus Institute would want to do. And she says she can't really give away any contact details, but the last contact that she had was maybe 20 years ago, before the destruction of the Magnus Institute. The details might be out of date because of how long it's been anyways. But she does say that she has some old listings somewhere that she had sent them, places that they asked for. And she's like, these are places that might be interesting for you. She might have those, and that might help with figuring out what they wanted. And so she was like, as long as I get to be like a talking head in documentary. And they're like, sure, okay. Yeah, you can do that. And Helen laughs very heartily, and it sounds just like the distortion laugh. And that makes Celia nervous, which makes Sam even more nervous, and made me jump when I first listened to it. So, welcome back, Helen the Distortion. In scene 5, we find ourselves in a laptop recording of Jack and Sam, like playing around. Sam's playing with Jack, and I don't know if this is the first time that they met, or that Sam is meeting Jack, because Jack doesn't really meet anyone because he's a baby. Whatever. Sam plays with him. He's imitating Helen, and during that, Celia's like kind of distracted. And Sam's like, "Hey, Jack's a Tory," because of like some joke that he made while he was imitating Helen, because Helen's a Tory. And Celia says she's sorry and that she feels like they were being watched. But Sam's like, "We were careful. No one's following us." And Celia puts Jack to sleep and comes back, and Sam thanks her for staying with him during this investigation. And Celia was like, "I like you. That's why I'm staying, because of you." And they start making out, and we get a fade to black. And the episode ends there. So, some notes. Sam critiquing Celia's categorizing. That's it. Jesus, the word. That sticks out for me for some reason. So it could be that just Celia's like cutting corners to get out early, and that's most likely the biggest reason that sort of interaction happened. But Sam critiquing it feels like he's feeling a type of way about it, and he wants it correct. Maybe there's some form of compulsion that he's getting from his job to want to do it right. Maybe. Or maybe that she's just cutting corners. He's just kind of pointing it out. One of those two. Something like that. Celia with her knife is analogous to Colin with his hammer, is analogous with John with his axe, is analogous to Elias with his pipe. Conclusion, Alice needs a gun. Or Gwen. Gwen and Alice both need guns. That's my note there. The case entity itself. So I, end, and dark is what I wrote down. I wrote down end before dark because that was the first one I thought, and so I was like, the end is because he's dying, blah blah blah. That's all that I like thought of. Then I like that one line where he's like, so obviously, first of all, obviously this is what we realized as error before is just the archivist, an archivist, doing his archivist thing, the thing that Mr. Jared feared was what I'm basing this entity off. And so it's either the end, because he's afraid of dying or something like that. But I think mostly it's like the hunt because it specifically talks about being chased. And like if he stops running, he'll die. And so that's what it feels like to me more than anything. That makes more sense, more thematic sense. But the archivist obviously is I. And so we get into what the archivist is in episode 197 Connected of the Magnus Archives. Basira asked Annabelle what happens to her, Annabelle, when the fears escape, and what happens to them, Basira and John, and everyone else who's within the world of Magnus Archives, who's an avatar. What happens to them when the fears escape? And Annabelle says that she would travel with them or just die. That is not her decision, and it's just what is going to happen. And she says that everyone else would lose any power that they gain from the fears. And then she also distinctly says John would lose parts of him that are the I but would survive. And so this adds into some of my theories. And the archivist that we see is parts of the I ripped away from John, and it is no longer human. It is full monster. There's no longer the parts of John that make him human. His humanity, his kindness, his like love and joy and stuff like that. It is just the monstrous part of him ripped away from him in Magnus Archives and sent to the Magnus Protocol world. So yeah, some conclusions drawn from this. There is a chance that Annabelle Cain is here too. Oh, which I would love to see. I would love to see Annabelle Cain because I don't think she gets enough flowers. I think she's an amazing antagonist, and I would love for her to be here again. What would she be doing? I do not know. Probably something bad. Probably just relaxing and not doing anything because she's like, I did what the web wanted me to do. I just love Annabelle Cain so much, and I want her in Protocol, and I want her to win, and not Agnes Montague. This is how Annabelle Cain can still win. I mean, if Agnes Montague is here too, then that's good too. But you know what I mean. So in episode 10, Saturday Night is when Sam and Alice released Error, which is now the archivist. And they were released. It was a key specifically that they found that unlocked something. And so my question is now, who locked it in there? Who locked the archivist in a box, a cage? What was that key made of? Why was it just left there? What is happening? Big question. Helen, I think it's really funny that Helen is an outlier of like other Magnus Archives characters that are in Protocol, who is still a realtor and a Tory, because she made a mention of equal warrior neighbors, which is a very conservative thing to say. And I just think it's kind of stupid funny that like there was a one-line thing in episode 187 checking out when John and Distortion Helen were talking, and she mentioned she was a secret Tory. And I just think it's funny that they're like, let's run with it. Let's run with her making her a Tory. And I'm like, come on. I don't want her to be a Tory. I love Helen. Don't make her a Tory. But yes, she's a Tory, and she laughed just like the Distortion, which is similar to when Michael Shelley laughed before he became a Distortion that we saw in episode 99, Dust to Dust. He laughed, and he sounded just like his laugh in Distortion, just Distortion seemed to like increase that laughter or something like that. Maybe she's not going to turn into the Distortion, but she's just there. She's going to give them some clues and then not appear again. And here's the thing. I don't think any of the characters we've seen in the past that were in Magnus Archives, now in Protocol, that being like Gigi, Jerry, Basira, Georgie, slightly, and Helen. I'm going to talk about Georgie real quickly. And like Georgie's definitely being being in connection with Celia, so she's probably going to come back. But for the people that they actively search for. So let's remove Georgie from my hands. The people that actually searched for and found, I don't think they're going to come back. Specifically because they were looking at them to see if they had any information about the Magnus Archives Institute, sorry. And like Jerry had some information, but it wasn't very helpful. Gigi basically doesn't know anything. Basira is not connected to any part of the Institute, and Helen is just giving him information, but that's it. And so I like that the four of them appear. I don't think they're gonna come back, and I also like that because we're like I remember hearing that like, yeah, you don't need to listen to the Magnus Archives to listen and understand the Magnus Protocol. I think that's a fat lie. But like I like that these characters that we saw from Magnus Archives are here now, and we're not going to come back to them. It doesn't feel like we're going to come back to them because we're just proving some things in the world. We're showing that these characters are not intertwined with the Institute, and so they're probably not going to come back. And I honestly don't want them to come back because I want to focus on newer characters and newer stories. And so it's really great to see Helen and Basira and Gertrude and Jerry, but I don't want them back longer than like 1 or 2 episodes. And Georgie's a separate thing because she's taking care of Jack, so that's slightly separate. But obviously, they're not looking into Georgie because she's connected to Celia, and Celia doesn't want to do anything with that. So that's slightly different. But like, still, Georgie is not. Georgie's also within that group of like they're not going to get anything from her. They're not going to get anything from them. So they're not going to come back in importance, and I like that. Obviously, Celia is a little afraid of Helen because we saw in episode 190 that Helen almost ate her, and so a lot of people on Tumblr were like, "Girl, she almost ate you. Stay away from her." And that's pretty funny. And Celia's distracted at home. I first thought it was like residual fear from her interaction with Helen. I was like, she's still probably like reeling from seeing the woman that tried to kill her in the apocalypse. But in reality, it's because she's feeling watched, which I'm like, yes, correct. You are being watched by us. And so when people in the Magnus Archives and Magnus Protocol say that they feel like they are being watched, that it means they are being watched by us and by something else, especially because I forgot what episode it was that I think it was Pet Project that Alice said that she felt like someone was following her. This was actually right after episode 10, so it was probably 11. Yeah, episode 11 is when Alice says that she was feeling like she was being watched. Yeah, so I was always like, hey, if you're you're in this world and you feel like you're being watched, be careful with that. Pay attention to that because you definitely are at some point. But yes, anyways, I like this episode mildly. I think that I don't really care for like sports stuff, so I didn't really care for the case in of itself. It wasn't that creepy, but I always love seeing like error do error stuff. Sorry, archivist. I also really liked the calling it error with like the closed with like the brackets. I think that would have been interesting to just keep it as error, but now that we know it's called archivist and it's archivist, that's neither here nor there. Also, it's archivist obviously is a really cool word to say, anyways. But like, yes, I think Helen also appearing, Imogen Harris, amazing, lover, Stan. Overall, this episode felt transitory, specifically because we're gearing up towards the end of the season. And so it definitely feels like we're just going through the motions and like arriving to conclusions that the audience already arrived to. But that's not a negative thing. That's just like how mysteries go. Like we the audience sort of like collect everything because we are pretty omnipotent into everything that is shown. And so the characters are finally starting to connect the dots and we're like, come on, dot connect. And yeah, that is pretty much it for this episode. Let me do a transition for next episode. So I'll see you for next episode. Hello, welcome back. This one's a doozy. I have that 10 pages of notes. But it's a really good episode. So there's a lot to talk about here. There's no updates here. Everything's pretty much the same. I think I'm gonna move minis somewhere else and then put like plushies here. Plushies here. Make it look prettier. And yeah. Episode 27, Driven. CAT3RB5535 the dates. The description is kidnapping, parentheses, carriage, dash slash dash, consumption, brackets, letter, close bracket. And I wanted really briefly to talk about like these bracket things. At some point, they stopped appearing next to the descriptions. They used to be doing the brackets to show what kind of mode of information was presented. I believe it stopped in episode 13. And I know that someone on Tumblr asked Alexander J. Newell why this was the case. 13 was the last one in Futures where there was a bracket form of delivery. And then episode 14 doesn't have that, and it continues that. Anyways, I believe it was on Tumblr that someone asked Alexander J. Newell why this was a case, and this was his response. I'm pulling it out in the future. Me, when I'm editing, will pull this up here. Right now, all I remember is that he said he thinks that Sam probably got lazy, and which I feel like a lot of the cases is also like combination of Sam, Alice, Celia, and Gwen doing the caseload. So that's something there. But we're back to it, and I like these little like brackets that show the mode of transportation for the information. That's really fun, actually. CAT3 is catalyst, parentheses, the growler. And it's rank B. The DPHW is death 5, pain 5, helplessness 3, weird 5. The date of the event began in February 18th, 1845, and the date of the categorization is May 10th, 2024. The author of this episode was Jonathan Sims. It aired August 22nd, 2024. Brief summary: Jonah Magnus studies a killer car, and the possible entities are the end or the stranger. In scene 1, we find Lena angry about a disorganized shelf that's behind Sam. Sam says it's probably Colin's. They're talking about it as if it's possible that Colin will return, but Lena neither confirms nor denies that he will. She's like, well, even if he does, anyways, by the time he does, it'll be after the ministerial visit, and she wants that fixed before. She wants Sam to clean it up so the minister doesn't see it and use it as an excuse for more oversight. And Sam says he needs to work on his caseload, so he can't do that. And Lena makes Gwen work on it instead, and then she leaves. And Gwen delegates the same work to Sam, and they're being very snappy to each other. Sam is in a very good mood, and it's for a reason. And Gwen is using her position against Sam because she's practically like, she's not, I don't know if she's still in name, just only in name, externals liaison, but she's still like, I'm your manager, so I'm managing you. He's like, don't do that. But anyways, she then looks for Alice to give her some more work. And we transition to the next scene, which is Augustus / Jonah reading out a letter. It begins in February 18th, 1845, of Jonah Magnus. They never actually say Jonah Magnus' name, but the details that they include within the statement make it so it is Jonah Magnus who is the letter writer. It's very obvious that's Jonah Magnus. A lot of my notes are just trying to rewrite the things that he says to make them more understandable, because a lot of the wording is very wordy, and I'm trying to make it understandable for myself and for anyone else who might also agree that the wording here is very wordy. So he's recording a quote failure, but he doesn't want to give up. He accepts N's recommendation, but the details of the collapse must be analyzed. He says he and his peers have been working on the great work for about 3 decades, but have unable to affect transmutations on a grander scale. So the Magnus Institute was built in 1818, and so 3 decades around is going to be 1845. And it seems that only individual endeavors have succeeded, but nothing grand scale. And this is only seeming to dampen their resolve rather than inspire them to do further. And so he's sort of like writing his thoughts about like the things that have happened and his sort of like worries about it. He questions if secrecy is countering the natural and unnatural philosophy they are doing. He also questions if the spiritual aspect is the reason only individuals have succeeded in transmutation. He removes all doubts because if it's only possible that individuals could have success in what they're doing, then the institute would not have been established in the first name with him as the leader and his name, Magnus Institute. Magnus, Jonah, Magnus. I was riding my bike when I was listening to this, and I was like, oh, that's Jonah. This is the first time we ever hear Jonah Magnus talking that wasn't Elias Bouchard, Jonah Magnus. So that's really interesting. That's really fun, and I hate this man, but like, this is a really, really interesting insight as to the Magnus Institute itself. The next letter is February 22nd, 1845. He talks about how his work helps him notice more. He was walking one day and hears some chartists, he says, a chartist crowd approaching, and so he flags down 2 carriages so they can like not interact with the chartists. And so the 2 carriages are newer and older, and I believe it's the newer one that his housekeeper calls a growler because of the way the wheels sound on the ground. And he's sort of debating which carriage to take, and he notices that the growler has only one coachman, which is not weird, but he's sitting oddly. He notices a handful of things. He sees the coachman is sitting forward and doesn't turn when he's getting into the car, which is definitely odd because when if you're like a taxi driver, let's say, it'd be like trying to get that connection with the person. He's also wearing a long oilskin greatcoat despite the warmth, and the color of the coach is kind of weird. The joints are smooth, and there's a sheen of the red plush furnishings that looks like it's wet. And that makes him sort of hesitate. And during that hesitation, another passenger seals a space, and gets into the growler instead of him. The moment that the man gets into the carriage and the door closes and the carriage leaves, he notices 2 things. One, he could not see the passenger anymore inside once he went inside and it left, like he didn't see anybody in there. And 2, there's a wind that lifted the driver's coat, and it looked like he was melded with the growler, as if he was grown from the wood. And the way that it's written is kind of clunky. It's like there's no space between them. It's just the wood grows into the driver. And so he resolves to keep an eye out for it again, just in case. He's going to stick to a different type of cab to avoid encountering this cab again. The next letter is February 26, 1845, and he says he found it again on the same street. He thinks that it's important for him to know about this thing because there's some information that he might glean from this. He realizes it's using traffic to disguise itself to pretend to be an actual carriage. And if you like actually pay attention, it looks very, very off. And he says it provide the traffic and like so many different like cars provides it with adequate hunting ground. Ugh. Jonah calls another cab and pays the cab to wait and follow the cab when it takes someone into its carriage. And eventually, a young man with a new frock coat enters, and the growler leaves. And so he begins to follow it for about an hour, and he sees blood pooling out of the wheels, staining the floor. eventually, after a long time, the Growler enters a covered alleyway, and Jonah gets off. The coach, his coach, he doesn't want to take him anywhere, and he's like, I paid him pretty well enough to follow, but after a while, he's like, I can't take you anymore. You gotta go. So he does, and he goes into the alleyway to like try to like figure out what it is, and he finds discarded objects, and which includes a dirty, used to be new frock coat. And so he wants to know more, and he kind of points to his frustrations with the failure of projects, plus Boyle's inheritors that are pushing him to want to do more. Boyle obviously was the person mentioned in episode 19 in relation to uh, Isaac Newton, and it was it's a letter from Robert Hooke to Robert Boyle, and so Boyle is obviously within the gentleman's, is it called gentleman's Royal Society group, dealing with alchemy and stuff, and so obviously its connection to the Magna is right there. Anyways, the next letter is March 2nd, 1845, where Jonah contracts Archibald Cameron, who is to help him investigate, who is part of the Innights Institute. He says he has his notebook and wanted to use the least skilled to investigate. He was like, yeah, Archibald is the youngest and least skilled of our group, so he was very eager to want to prove himself. He convinced Archibald to enter the coach and never promised him his safety. And he enters the coach with a notebook, Archibald does, ready to be useful for the Magnus Institute, because Jonah very explicitly is like, this is really, really important to the Institute. If you do this, it's really good for the Institute. And Archibald's probably like, I think I'm gonna be famous with this. Yeah, poor Archie. And so when he's in the carriage, he is writing in his notebook, and he's writing his observations, even past after the loss of his skin. And Jonah knows when he's reading the notebook, the moment when his eyes fall out of his skull, and this is only a few moments after Archie accepted that the doors would never open again. And the last deduction that Archie was able to write that was legible was that the rate of digestion, which is an interesting word, was linked to his own level of fear. And his own fear also led him to write erratically and illegibly till the very end. And yeah, he is eaten by the coach. And Magnus concludes that the process is supernatural, since the only stains in the notebook were blood, not chemical. So he says the research now will be transformed by this revelation, and it sort of empowers their ambitions and makes them seem more worthwhile. He's like, the presence of these beings that are no longer myth, that are within, like, I think he says, the heart of the empire, the London Empire, the British Empire, it just makes their work seem actually worthwhile to do. You had to sacrifice somebody for that, though. So in scene 3, Gwen tries getting Alice's attention, but she's busy polishing knives, and Gwen tells her that's not even part of your task list. And Gwen asks if Alice ever got any weird emails. Here, Alice states she is openly trans on the internet, so there's a lot of speculation online. I know that, like, is Alice trans or not? I think it was Alexander J. Newell or John Sims, one of those two, on Tumblr, stated canonically that Alice is trans, but this is the first time within the world of protocol, the text of protocol, that Alice is canonically trans, and that's amazing. Anyways, that was also pretty funny. It's like, what do you think? I get weird emails because Britain, UK, J.K. Rowling. No, I don't. Anyways, and then she's like, actually, I'm talking about in work. And Gwen's like, I got an email from a gibberish address. And Alice asks what the email has, and Gwen briefly reads the files. And there's a moment where she's like, actually, it just seems like old files. She's lying. She's lying, and you can hear the little glitches in the noise of her recording of her lying through her ass of like these files are old and not important. And she says they're old paperwork. There's nothing important here, and she lies that she deletes them. And Alice is like, okay. She sort of like brushes her off, and then she leaves to clean like the screens. And Gwen was lying to her. Gwen was lying to her many times. What did you get, Gwen? What did you get? In scene 4, Sam jokes with Celia about using the printer, and Celia is looking at the listings that Helen had sent them of the properties that the Magnus Institute were looking to buy, etc. And so she's separated into 3 piles: ones that they bought, ones that they put an offer in but didn't close on them, and ones that they just didn't go anywhere with it. And so Sam asked, like, why didn't they like do anything with those, the third one? And she says there's very reasons that they didn't pan out. Some of them is just the owner stopped wanting to sell the location. But one of the most common one that they see is that the Magnus Institute would send weird requests and never follow up on them after the fact. And like one of them is they wanted a picture of a constellation from like a certain vantage point of the building, but never got back to them. Celia says that astrology is definitely important for alchemy, which is the thing that they know that Magnus Institute was doing. But like that's only really important for like the location of it. So it's just kind of confusing why that location was important, etc., etc. Some other requests were wanting the properties with like first generation perchloroethylene machines, which are just toxic washing machines. And most requests seem to be over the phone, and the ones that she had, that Celia had, were ones sent by letter or ones sent by Helen herself. And so like most of the requests are not even documented. So Sam and Celia both start looking at properties that were owned by the Magnus Institute. Some of them are still technically owned by the Magnus Institute even to this day, despite the Magnus Institute being dead, burned down. Right when they do this, Sam begins awkwardly asking to talk about it. And Celia says it was great sex, and they can like work it out together to see if it's like something they want to keep going or this is one time thing. But like they enjoyed it, so let's act like adults, Sam, and talk about it and discuss and stuff like that. And it seems there's a moment where Sam's like, I can't stop thinking about, and I don't know if he's trying to be like, I can't stop thinking about your body, or like something that happened during that moment of intimacy. But right when he's saying that, Celia interrupts him and distracts him. He's like, oh, I can't stop thinking about the one from Oxford, right? Celia interrupts to distract him and pointing out the Oxford property, which was last purchased in 1997. And it was odd that the shopping unit was bought, not rented, because I guess that's what usually happens. And it was only set up as an outreach center, but only occupied for about a month or two and then locked up and then left alone. It was owned by the Hilltop Center, and is still they still officially own it technically, and it's been shuttered since 1997, and no one's been there since. And they start like talking. They're like, "Do you think it's worth looking into it?" And I don't want to say they're interrupted, but like Alice comes in and she's like muttering. She's angry and she's pissed off about the minister, and she names him. She names the minister. She says, if I hear one other word about Trevor Bloody Herbert MP, blah, blah, I'm going to kill him or something like that. I don't know. Everything else she was talking about, I was still processing Trevor Herbert's name while she was speaking about blowing up the government. And she's like, I'm probably just feeling more anti-establishment than usual. But I was still processing that, so I didn't get any of that until the second read through. So, but anyways, yes. Hi, Trevor Herbert is the MP. It's great. We'll get back to that. Anyways, yeah, Lena and Gwen is just driving her crazy. Alice asks Sam and Celia what they're doing. And they're like, we're talking about this thing, you don't have to pay attention. But she's like, actually, no, I want to go with you since the last time they poked around the archivist room, she says, in the ruins of the Magnus archives, and they released the error slash archivist, and she wants to stop Sam from doing something stupid again, and maybe hopefully can also find something to protect themselves with. And they're like, right after, like, really quick, right after this conversation, Celia's like, you didn't tell me that the room was labeled archivist. And I was just like, I think we did. She's like, no, you said that you messed with a ritual design and now it is released, but never said the word archivist. And Sam is like, is that important? And Celia doesn't know. And she's not lying about it either. But in the end, all three of them decide to investigate the Hilltop Center in Oxford. And that's when the episode ends. I have a lot of notes here. So, yeah, there's a lot in this episode. But most of it is delivering info, but not enough to derive more from. And so, is there, first, just to begin with, is there an importance to the shelf that Sam points out? Because I don't know. Because there's three different reasons why that would be there in the first place. That mention of the shelf that's messed up could be that there's actually something important in that shelf. Is there something that might actually break the not break open the case of the mystery of what the OIAR is doing? Maybe. Is it only just to show that Colin will be back and that, yeah, he may be arrested, but he's like still probably like in there somewhere? And three, is it just to show that Lena's getting extra anal and extra worried about the ministerial visit? Because obviously she does not want the minister to like be aware of the things they're doing. He probably knows about the supernatural things they're doing. She probably just does not want him to be up in their grill about it. And it's Trevor Herbert. Come on. Anyways, no, I don't know if the shelf has any importance to it. What it may have served in that moment, one of those three different things. I think it's mostly that just Lena's getting more anal about everything. And if so, that's pretty fun, but it's just, it's just the details that I have to pay attention to. I'm like, does this just mean anything? The Jonah Magnus letters tell a lot, but there's more questions than answers. Here, who is N? My boyfriend said N from Pokemon. That's not N. That's a different N. What collapsed? There was a talk about a collapse, and they needed to describe try to figure out why. This is him just writing stuff down, and him saying like, let's not get disillusioned, and just focus on our work. What collapsed, Jonah? And then what is the end goal of the transmutations in and of itself? So the Growler entity, end or stranger, because of how unsure I am of some of these statements, I tend to reach for end because it's death and it's easy. But I do actually think this is stranger if you actually think about it, because it's hidden in plain sight. It's a fake body. It's basically like the anglerfish where it's trying to imitate something, but when you pay attention to it, it's definitely not it. Not not carriage. Yeah. And also there's some emphasis on skin, but I feel like that's more part of the horror aspect, killing murder aspect, than because if it was just skin being used, then it'd be very stranger. But there was emphasis on skin. I don't know, there's just skin mentioned there. Yeah. But I think that the Growler is an aspect of the stranger. I mean, it's a catalyst, it's an object. Monster slash thing that is not a human or location. The Institute was established to do the alchemical great work, and so they began without the knowledge of the importance of fear. And so, it seems that they see that the alchemical work that they do is separate from the fear entities if they are within Smirch 14 or not. There's still some powers that feed on fear, and their alchemical work is separate from that, but maybe they work together in balance. And this sort of recalls episode 21, Breaking Ground, where Dr. Kennings worries that there is too much fear that counterbalances the optimism within the Millennium experience, and thus makes their work unstable, because stability is definitely a very important thing within alchemy itself as well. Like at this point, I was like, let me just look at what transmutation is, because I don't even know transmutation from like Dungeons and Dragons, and that is, the transmutation in alchemy is just changing minerals to another mineral. And when I looked up transmutation in alchemy, one of the first things that popped up, I think it was the second or third thing that popped up, was a wiki page for magnum opus in alchemy, which is also named the Great Work. And it specifically is to create the Philosopher's Stone, which is known to prolong life and to give power to whoever holds it. This is when I got into like a conversation with my boyfriend about alchemy, and he talked about because he watched Full Metal Alchemist. I might watch that now because of this, but whatever. He talks about like purification. There wasn't mention of purification within the statement and the case, because Jonah Magnus says, let me just calm these doubts. He says specifically that purification is not just in the chemical, and that's sort of like him saying like, let me just purify my mind, clear my mind, etc. He's just connecting it to an alchemical concept that he works with. But I was like, we were talking about purification, and it's like removing the excess, but leaving the important, and sort of compare that to what I talked about prior with Archivist, where it's removing the excess, which is humanity, John, and leaving the important, or what they want to use, the Archivist. Transmutation itself, what I'm gleaming from the text, is that they are trying to pull powers that they gain to be powerful. They want to create people who have powers. We saw this sort of idea of like in past episodes where the Magnus Institute is seeing how viable certain objects or people are for stuff, or doing something. And so this adds onto that pile of theory of like the Magnus Institute was trying to do something with trying to create avatars, trying to create externals, trying to create monsters. They probably want the Institute to be powerful in and of itself as well, especially because they're trying to make this grand ritual, this grand transformation that has not been successful in large amounts, but has been successful with individuals. So yeah, I still don't have as much information about we still don't have as much information about what the Magnus Institute wanted to do now that it is dead. We just have to see what the dredges are. Dredges? We just have to see what is left over to glean what is it that they want to do. Gwen's weird email is the same as Sam's weird email that he got in episode 20, Social Stigma, that got him the papers on Starkwell. And Gwen is hiding it and doesn't want Alice to see or know them. And because we know that Alice and Gwen know that each other knows about externals and like monsters and stuff, this might be slightly different than that, something that she wants to keep to herself, that she doesn't deem important for their knowledge to survive. And I can't help but think that it's also something regarding Starkwell or the OIAR in and of itself. And like this gibberish email obviously comes from Freddie, John, who is in Freddie, the OIAR, whoever's recording them, whoever's listening to them, we don't know who it is from, but it's definitely from somebody trying to get them information. So the properties bought by the Magnus Institute probably were looking for location for their grand ritual, or at least staging grounds for this grand ritual. As mentioned in 21 Breaking Ground, they talk about astrology in Breaking Ground as well, in terms of like, Kenny was like, hey, we shouldn't look at the Gregorian calendar, we should focus on astrology, because that's important, guys. Hey guys, let's not look at the change of millennia, because there are people who don't follow that calendar. The toxic wash machines, the polyethylene, is this is definitely probably for a chemical work. Specifically, it is a colorless, non-flammable liquid solvent used to drying fabrics and degreasing metals. What does that mean? I think that's a little detail that's really interesting. I don't think it's going to count too much. Yes, Sam and Celia had sex. I think Celia topped. Moving on, we also I have to be transparent with my emotions here. I was getting angry. I was getting confused and angry because when they started talking about the Hilltop Center Outreach Center, I believed it was regarding the Hilltop Center in episode 7, Give and Take. And I wrote some notes. I was like, it feels like this is the first time that they're hearing about it. And they talk about it like the info that they're getting is from the documents only. There's no mention of a fire. There's no mention of the case that they saw. And is it that they forgot about it? Because Celia listened to it specifically. This is like she arrived episode 6 introductions, and this was one of her first cases, and she listened to it and commented on recognizing John's voice. And maybe this is an outreach center, and I was getting really angry because this feels like sloppy writing that Sam or Celia would not mention hearing about this this location in a prior case. And so I was like trying to like understand why this felt wrong to me. And I was like, okay, so they say in this episode that it closed in 1997, but in episode 7, Give and Take, it was burned down in 2015. So that doesn't make sense. And I was trying to like pay attention to why, and I was wrong. It's the wrong place. I'm thinking the wrong place, and I'm getting myself angry over nothing. I believe it's the same place in episode 17, Saved Copy, the Magnus Institute Oxford Outreach Center, because I was looking into it. I was like, wait, Outreach Center. I heard that before in episode 7, Give and Take, and I went into the transcript. Control F, was it? Yeah, Control F, search for Outreach, didn't pop up. And it closed in 2015. But this one, episode 17, Saved Copy, the event occurred November 30th, 1997, the year that it was closed. Duh. And I just felt really stupid and angry that I was getting myself angry for nothing. And actually, this makes me feel a lot better because Celia did listen to the episode, but no one heard her listen to that case. She doesn't mention it to Sam because she was struggling with like teleporting and stuff, and so she was in Oxford and she missed a date with Sam because she was in Oxford, and she gets this case, and after the fact she's like, thanks, but it's not the same. And then Alice comes in and she's like, what you get? And she's like, nothing new, nothing important, nothing helpful. And Alice is like, is it ever? And she was like, no, it isn't. And so she like heard the case, and it was a message from Freddie / John / the OIR to Celia. And she doesn't want to share that with Sam because she's doing something. It's connected to her traveling, so maybe she's lying about it. Maybe she doesn't want to share with Sam and Alice that she's heard about this place before. It was in her caseload, but it's not like they're going to look into her caseload. We saw Lena be angry, kind of, that Alice tampered with Sam's caseload. And this is not the one with fire. This is the one with Darian, who teleported to. He was in a therapist session and then teleported to the outreach center and found his another version of himself who's torturing his father. That's that location. The outreach center is probably just another way for people to get statements to the Magnus Institute. And the Institute probably labeled this place as an outreach center for like a way to help. Be like, you dealt with something weird? Just come here and let us know. That's what it felt like, and that's where they're going to. And I feel so much better about that writing than if it was the other Oxford Hilltop Road area. Because I was like, first I was like, that just feels like sloppy writing. But no, this actually, now it's even smarter writing, because Celia's not saying anything and she's pretending, and she's gonna get caught in a lie, and Celia knows. Also, I've discovered this when I was doing my research about like trying to figure out what the truth was, and I found this out, and I was like, I have not seen anybody talk about it. But it's specifically that the Outreach Center recommended continued incarceration of Darien as part of the, quote, Welling Mutea Materia research program. And there was a Dr. Welling in 21 Breaking Ground. And both of those state cases happened around the same time period. I mean, what was it? Breaking Ground was in 1999, 98, and this is a year after it closed, after the Outreach Center closed. So it's very likely that Dr. Wellings created the Mutea Materia research program, setting up this breach program to learn about maybe transmutative events or just other strange events that occurred. And that was it's really interesting that I found that, because I've not seen anybody talk about Dr. Wellings before. I need to know what Dr. Welling was doing. Trevor Herbert is the minister. How? How? We've seen before people from Magnus archives in the Magnus Protocol, as we saw with Helen, Basira, Gigi, Jerry. I mentioned that last episode. Now Trevor Herbert is here. Last person I expected to be the minister. Last person. Am I a little weirded, peeved out that it feels kind of random? Maybe. It does feel a little random that Trevor Herbert, Trevor the Tramp, is the minister. But it doesn't feel wrong? I don't know. We'll have to see how that pans out, but it's just so odd that Trevor the Tramp, Trevor the Vampire Hunter, the Hunt, Avatar of the Hunt, is minister of the OIAR, I guess, or just within the British government. You know, Celia's worried about the archivist label. She knows John. She said last episode she doesn't know she doesn't know why the archivist is acting how it should be. Like she said, it's acting in a strange way than I thought. And Sam was like, "What do you mean by that?" But she wasn't able to respond to that because Helen interrupted. And I look back at episode 10 Saturday night, and the transcripts show that that error archivist emerged from a trap door, like the key was dragged over to a padlock and the trap door opened. And so that opens up some thoughts of like, did the Magnus Institute create the archivist, or was it brought to this world when the fears escaped the archives universe? Did like the Magnus Institute, what was the term, purify purposefully an archivist and created the archivist monster and left behind the thing? Or was this the pulling of an archivist from John over in archives to protocol universe? I don't know. I don't know which one's more interesting, because both are pretty interesting. To think that on one level, my theory obviously is that John was releasing the fears, pulled the archivist into this world. Interesting. That's my theory that I got from last episode. But now, sort of like thinking about this, sort of like thinking about their transmutation and alchemy and purification, what if they led maybe this protocol's John? Probably not be John, probably someone else. But protocol's John to become an archivist and then purify him to create only the monster, and then trap the monster in a trap door in a room labeled archivist. See, that's the thing, because if it was trapped, I would think it'd be trapped in like a cage or like something. It'd just be labeled on the door or whatever, archivist. But because it was within the room that had the archivist label on it, as in the office of the archivist, and there was a trap door for it. Why? That's just, there's some disconnect in like some theories, and I'm putting my foot down and saying that the archivist that we see here is the energy, the eye pulled from John in archives to protocol. But there's a thought of like, who put it in the trap door? Was it the archives? Was it the institute? Was it just the fears spilling into this world and just putting it there? What happened? What put it there? I don't know. Anyways, I was writing these notes and I was getting like antsy because I was like, there's so much here. And I needed to talk about it with my boyfriend. So I told him, hey, let's listen to this episode. So we did. We went to a bakery, and on the drive over, we listened to this episode. And so I have extra notes from that are not in chronological order like I tried to do. So notes after the fact, re-listen with my boyfriend. Sam's in a good mood because of sex with Celia. That's why he's in a good mood. Duh. Chartists. I forgot to look up what Chartists are. Chartists are the first mass movement of the working class, which was spurred on by the failure of the 1832 Reform Act to extend the vote beyond those owning property. So, like, people, it was before 1832, during, whatever. The people who could vote were people who owned property. And Chartists basically allowed for there to be universal male suffrage. Obviously, like, years before female suffrage. This was like the big voting rights for all men, and Chartists were part of that. When Jonah is saying that the endeavors we each undertook alone, it's kind of similar to me. I wrote down able to gain powers by themselves, and I'm like, this just seems like an overtly like wordy academic way to talk about the people that Jonah Magnus was in cahoots with: Fairchild, Lucas, Barnabas Bennett, etc. Nathaniel Lucas. Was it Nathaniel Lucas? Yeah. Those men who became avatars of their respective Maxwell Rayner respective entities. That just seems like the way that just going around about way to saying, hey, we became avatars by ourselves. And I sort of began thinking like, well, does Jonah have eye powers? Is he part of the eye? Is he an avatar of the eye here? We never really talk about it, but when he talks about like personal endeavors, he never excludes himself from that. So it seems like he's succeeded and his peers have succeeded in individual moments, but not in their grand ritual that they want to do. And so I probably can theorize that Jonah still or has now a connection with the eye. And he probably uses, if he does, he probably uses this good sight to see the growler for what it is, to pay attention, or like the moment that he called the two carriages, he was able to pause for long enough because the eye allowed him to see just quick enough the odd irregularities with the growler to make him notice it. And he specifically says, like, it's odd that the natural philosophy that we work on allows us to see what is unusual or something like that. And that also feels like a roundabout way of saying, hey, it's really interesting that the work that we do makes me, who is dealing with the eye, see more. And there was also like just an emphasis on Jonah Magnus's eye in the text itself textually. So there could be something there about him already being part of the eye. He just doesn't mention it at all, but who knows? I did want to draw a comparison between the growler spitting up non-human materials, shirts, notebooks, etc., an umbrella, that is similar to Jean Jacket in the Jean Jacket alien in Nope, that like didn't digest the things that weren't human that it ate. So like the fake horse and the coin that killed the dad in the beginning of the movie, stuff like that. That seems very similar in my mind of like carriage eats people, but not the just people itself, organic material, but spits out the notebooks. Same with Jean Jacket, who eats the people but spits out everything else. Archibald's death is very reminiscent. And I was like writing this down. I was like, it's so similar to this other thing, but no, it's exactly the same thing that it's reminiscent to, because it's reminiscent of various assistants that were sacrificed by the Magnus Institute, because Archibald is part of the Magnus Institute. But those that were sacrificed by the Magnus Institute and Leitner in the Magnus archives. I mean, we saw. I'm putting this down. We saw Leitner talk about his assistants and how they tried learning about the books that he got and their horrible fates that occurred to them, and then like Emma Harvey, Fiona Law, Sarah Carpenter, Eric Delano in some extent, Michael Shelley, I guess also Sasha and Tim as well, sort of like in that vein of just I love the type of horror felt when it's talking about the assistance to those in power being sacrificed. Because in episode 80 of Librarian, when it is Leitner talking to John about his assistants, and he would like say this guy was torn apart, this guy was this girl was picked up by a hand, this guy was consumed by a pile of flesh. That was terrifying. When we learned that Gertrude sacrificed Michael Shelley to stop the Great Twisting, when Emma Harvey led Sarah Carpenter to be consumed by a desolation monster. And like the things that Emma Harvey tried to get Fiona Law and Emma Harvey like into, like just the horror of someone in power putting someone below them in the line of danger and them suffering because of that is a very distinct feeling that I feel that was very successful in Magnus Archives, and now we're seeing in Magnus Protocol. And I think that's a very successful thing that Jonathan Sims and Alexander J. Newell are able to write and create in a way that doesn't feel overtly like cynical. It's horrifying. And there's a distinct feeling of like, oh, it makes me dislike, obviously, the people in power. That's why I don't like Leitner. That's why I don't like Jonah Magnus, because he literally just did that, And I just really commend them for being able to do that, mainly in like episode 80 Librarian and episode 167 Curiosity. Like both moments here and this episode 27 Driven was just really good with doing that sort of horror, and I enjoy that a lot. And yeah, that is it. I'm so sorry this part was so long. There's just so much within this episode, and it's just like Trevor Herbert, come on. Alice, I love Alice so much. Sam is so immature. I was talking with my boyfriend. Is like Sam and I cannot wrap my head around their relationship, because Sam feels so immature compared to Celia, and there might not they might be within the same age, but just Sam is so like he's like, are we gonna talk about it? And Celia's like, the sex that we had, yeah, we can talk about that. And Sam's like, actually, I mean, yeah, I guess. And Celia's like, yeah, it was pretty good. We can act like adults about it, right, Sam? He's like, maybe I can, I don't know. Immature. Gwen is amazing as well, and she's the moment that she grabbed some more same no same thing that happened before, where she was like all like when she thought she had the power, she antagonized Ink 5 and the moment that Ink 5 pushed back, she crumbled. This is gonna happen the same thing here. She has all the power now, quote unquote, working under Lena and using that against Sam and Alice, and they're like pushing back against her, and she crumples easily. I love her. She's such a she's such a, what's that term, wet mop. I love Gwen. I need to see her family. I need to see why her last name's Bouchard. And Celia knows. Anyways, we'll see you for episode 28. The next episode, transition. Let's do transition. Well, I'll see you all soon. Well, hello there. I had to adjust the camera so that my transition would fit. That's the last time I do transitions. Okay, hi. We're back. Last episode for this crop of episodes. 2 more episodes left to the finale of season 1 of the Magnus Protocol. And in contrast to last episode, this episode, I love this episode. Episode 28 was amazing. However, there's not much answers here. And I don't dislike it at all. And despite the lack of answers, it's still really good. But we definitely got a lot of information. Nothing that helps us with the mystery. But, well, we'll get into that. Episode 28, Interruptions. The code is CAT2RB2578 the dates. The description was transmutation parentheses human / ceremony parentheses academic. Category 2 is an agent. For this, I put Dr. Welling, and it is rank B. The DPHW is death 2, pain 5, helplessness 7, and weird 8. The date of the event happened August 17th, 1998, and the date of the or not even, well, no one really categorizes specifically. The date of the extraction of the case is May 13th, 2024. The author of this episode was Jonathan Sims. The air date was August 29th, 2024. Brief summary, Trevor Herbert, MP, and Sam's story. And the possible entities here are flesh and eye. I'll talk about why these are not perfect, obviously. But yeah, that's what I have right now. In scene 1, Lena is escorting Trevor Herbert, MP, voiced by Ian Hales, same voice actor for Trevor Herbert in Max Archives, of course, through the offices. He's yawning and he's tired, and he asks why it's so late. Well, during this, she introduces Sam, Celia, and Alice, and Lena says that the system is locked on a 24-hour cycle. She says that crawlers scrape the online sources in the day, and then the cases are added to their caseloads at night. And it's probably just going to be too expensive to change. And there's a moment that she's like, but any sort of overhaul would take a lot of money, and she's going to suggest to keep it as is. But Trevor jumps in and agrees, or says instead, that if it's not broken, don't fix it or something like that. And it's very much like he's taking her idea, because she was going to say just leave it as be because it's going to be too expensive, but he jumped in front and said that before her, so he takes the credit of saying let's just keep it as is, which is a very corporate male thing to do. Trevor looks over at like everyone else, and he calls them a very diverse team, and he sort of like toys the idea of bringing like a photographer for a picture for some reason. And he turns to Sam and asks how the numbers are doing. He says accidents, or well, first he doesn't know Sam's name, and Gwen helps him, and then he says accidents, and then Lena tells him incidents, and asks Sam how the numbers are going, and Sam's like, and then Lena just responds for him and says that like the numbers are improving since Trevor took charge. And Trevor's like, awesome, great, which is also a very male thing to be, a male corporate thing to be like, corporate, this is governmental, whatever. Same genre of man to be like, hey, a person who's under, respond to me. Someone else responds, awesome, great, answer, question answered, does not care about them. So, yeah. And he's pleased with that information, and he just doesn't want Gorman and Smith on his back. He says as long as they're off my back. I don't know who they are. I did write them down in my characters. I haven't shared my characters outside of the OIR in a while. So I'll do that at the end of the season. But yeah, it's I don't know who Gorman and what's his face Gorman and Smith are. I believe it feels like some sort of oversight company or group, something like that. Anyways, scene two. Lena and Gwen escort Trevor to Lena's office, and they're like talking, and Trevor begins saying he's forced to intervene despite his want for hands-off approach, which Lena appreciates. He says he's forced to intervene because he's heard from a reliable source that a subcontractor was implicated in a recent death, and they're implicated as a murder suspect, someone who murdered people. And Lena tells Gwen to step out, and Gwen begins to slowly step out. And he says that he went to Eton with a Daniel Turner, who is the commissioner. And Gwen asks, what subcontractor was implicated, and he says that an OIR external contract was found with bodies of two men who died who were tattooed. Didn't write that down, but they were tattooed. Uh, and he says he kept it quiet, but the commissioner just swept it under the rug. But he needs to know that this isn't a liability to the OIAR, and he wants someone fired. He says that whoever the contract came from, fire them, or leave to her discretion. Like what she does, what Lena does to the person who left the contract, either fire them or whatever it is, he will leave it to her discretion. Uh, Throughout that, Gwen's asking questions, and Lena is telling Gwen to leave. And then after that, Trevor leaves. He says it's very late, and the recording shuts off, so we don't get like the aftermath of Lena talking to Gwen about this mess. In scene three, Alice, Sam, and Celia are in the break room, and they're laughing. And Alice is saying that she told them that he would be clueless, and Celia was like, "I could have. I mean, I would thought that he would have some inkling of some information of what we do here, but I guess nothing." And they're like talking about it. They're joking about his diversity comments, and Alice asks Celia like, "What makes you diverse?" And Celia is like, "I'm a woman," and Alice is like, "That's not enough. What else?" And Celia says she's pan, so we have a canonical pan representation here, and my boyfriend's pan. Yeah. So, which is really funny. And then Alice asks if Celia is from anywhere exciting to add on to that diversity quota that they're trying to create. And Celia says, "You have no idea." And then Alice is like, "Yeah, because you're so mysterious." And then the humor just kind of dies. And Alice leaves the office before Lena and Gwen begin bothering them again. And she says she's basically going to get drinks with Teddy, which we saw in a prior episode 18 solo work, that Teddy got a job or went to an application interview with a job that's still in the Royal Mint Court. And he was sort of avoiding Alice, but it seems that Alice is now talking with Teddy once more, so she's getting drinks with him, which is where she's leaving to do right now. After Alice leaves, Sam tells Celia that he, respects her privacy, but he can't get any closer to her. She keeps so secret. Oh, and he asked her to think about sharing her secrets with him. Just think about it. And she's like, "Okay, I'll think about it." And then Sam, I think it's so ironic that Sam's trying to be so this kind of man, and he's like, "Just think about it." And then he says that, "I'm gonna go look out what car this guy drives because I made a bet with Alice to see what he's driving." And so he leaves to see what car Trevor MP is driving. And I'm like, you're so immature, boy. You're so immature. In scene four, we have a phone recording, and we hear the rain outside that is happening at this late at night. And so when I was listening to this episode, I was riding my bike, and I was specifically at this moment, It was already, like, drizzling for me when I was writing, but by the time it got to this scene, it started, like, not a heavy downpour, but it's definitely raining pretty consistently while I was riding my bike, so I got soaked while I was hearing the rain happening in in my headphones, so that was a really immersive experience there. So we find Trevor telling his driver Wilson to leave, and Gwen approaches, and she's like, "Hi, I'm Gwen," and he's like, "Who are you again?" "Gwendolyn Bouchard," and he recognizes her grandfather Jeremy, and she says that she hasn't spoken to him in a while. She says it's been a few years, and that her name recognition earns his moment of time, just a quick moment of time. And she tries to talk to him, but that quick moment of time passes, and he says, just call my office. And then Gwen's like, actually, Lena's lying to you, and that's when he gets interested. Gwen says that Lena made a mistake, and that caused the contractor mess. I didn't write this down, but she's spinning the narrative that Lena sent Gwen to speak to Ink 5 Old without protection, and the mistake was sending her without protection. And because of that lack of protection, people died. And so Gwen's spinning that narrative with this. But she says she also has a dossier with files going back to 20 years that detail Lena's incompetence as head of OIAR. Incompetence and malfeasance, but I didn't want to write it down. Incompetence as head of the OIAR. And Trevor asked her, like, where did you get this? And she was like, I got it from a concerned third party who wishes to remain anonymous. And Trevor thanks her and gives him his personal phone number, and then he leaves, telling her that he'll keep in touch with her regarding Lena. In scene 5, a tape recorder turns on. We hear the same rain of outside, and we hear Sam like getting out of the building, and he tries to see what car uh Trevor MP is driving, and he also sees Gwen briefly, I believe. He's like, is that Gwen? Hey, Gwen! And then like the door closes or something like that, and or the door closes behind him, I think, and he can't get inside the building anymore. I don't know where Gwen went. Might have been somewhere else. And throughout it all, we hear deep breathing. And God, when I was riding my bike, it was so it was terrifying, because he's just kind of uh says an explicitive about like being trapped or whatever, but then like cuts himself off and begins his intoning. He begins to intone unprompted. He tries to fight back, and then there's more breathing from like around him, in close to the tape recorder at least. And he begins to tell his story. His parents talked about the Magnus Institute and the first time that he heard it, and they were proud that he was selected to apply for a gifted kid program. And throughout it all, he's trying to like push past it, to stop it, to have some control, but he's being compelled by the archivist slash error, and you hear it's very uh hard. It's very hard to hear, but the transcript says that error slash archivist says more, and it's kind of hidden within all the and the rain and stuff. But like, if you pay attention, if you like turn up the volume real loud, you can hear it specifically say more, and he keeps pushing against it, and he keeps getting compelled, and eventually he loses the fight, and the world of soundscape recedes as he gives his statement. And now, Sam's statement. He talks about his first train trip alone, and he's with two young kids who are also from his school, called Saul and Joy, and also a supervisor, Mrs. Lang. He feels excited for the trip, but he loses it when he arrives to the austere institute. He calls it austere. And the kids and the supervisor, and I assume there are also more kids within the train. It's just those three from that school that got selected. But anyways, they're it's greeted by a man named Gilbert, who he says is very young looking, and they're escorted to like a waiting room. And Sam is tested by a pair of stern women, and he's asked like non-academic questions. They're questions that are sort of like therapy questions, like how's home like, when is it appropriate to lie, or something like that. And his answers, when he responds with the answers, the women seem unhappy, and so because of that he starts to cry because he thinks he's failing. And when he cries, the women get even more annoyed, and he runs away from the room and eventually gets lost within the corridors of the Magnus Institute. He's trying different doors and they're all like locked, but eventually he finds an open door with the name Dr. F. Dwelling on the plaque, and there's like a bright light spilling out of the room. The light to him feels wrong, and there is also some form of chanting. Inside, he sees an old man in a tweed suit chanting over a naked person on a table, presumably a corpse because he said it was pale and still. There's a pile of like weird machines and beakers on one side, and above them are stone and metal like chunks hung in the air. And he doesn't like say if they're like hung by like string or if they're like floating. And there's a sickly yellow light everywhere. And Sam, as a young child, is simply looking for a grown up because he's lost and he's sad and he just wants to go home. So he goes into the room and just says, hello. That surprises Dr. Welling, because I'm assuming this is Dr. Welling, and the chanting he's doing stops. When he first comes into the room, he says that he's muttering on top of, above the corpse, just muttering. But then he interrupts him, and then the things that he's saying, he stumbles over his words and just cuts it off. And that makes the things around him break and fall, which makes me think that the stone and metal that were hanging around were levitating, and then after the breaking of the ritual fell, and all the light like turns off. And he can't see a thing, but he can still see Welling turn to him and open his mouth wide. And I was really scared as to what was gonna come out of his mouth. And Sam was also really scared about, like, he was mostly scared. He wasn't seeing the supernatural as a young child. He was just seeing an adult look like he's gonna yell at him. But no, his bones inside his body, specifically his arm at that point, begin to rip through his muscle and skin. And the he says that the bones still had ligaments on them, and the joints shone with the bright yellow light that felt wrong. And they begin to pull off meat from the body as if it's trying to get out. And he sees Welling, and he could see that Welling still feels pain, even though he doesn't make a noise, doesn't move. He's just standing there with his arm, I guess, neat, flapping around, and his bone arm. Eventually, his arm raises up to his face and pulls off his skin and reveals a skull. His skull. And he sees the skull smiling at him, more or less. And that makes Sam run away finally. And as he starts saying this, the worldscape around Sam in present day being compelled by Archivist, the rain and sound returns back. It was still there in the background, but not as strong, and now it's slowly recedes back into louder. And he continues his story, says that the pair of women that had questioned before found him again and returned him to the children. And he never told anyone what he saw. And his parents thought that he was upset about his failure, as they were also upset about his failure. And he couldn't look at them in like straight on. And he says he couldn't look at them not because he was afraid of failure, afraid of them of their disappointment, but he could still see their skulls beneath their faces. He sort of finishes his statement. He says that he's going back to find something, but he doesn't complete his sentence and he passes out before he's able to say what he's looking to find. And the archivist recedes, the tape recorder turns off, and the episode ends. So notes. I don't really have that much notes, thankfully, compared to last episodes. But at least for me, it's good to know how the OIR gets its cases. And Lena specifically says the crawlers get the cases, and crawlers is a very specific word in my mind, and so I did look up what crawlers what would come up when I just looked up crawlers besides like other horror stuff. And it looks like it's a reference to web crawlers. Hello, which search the web and index it, and it's sort of like the imagery of spiders and stuff. And so, is there a thing here about like the web being integral here? Maybe. Crawlers, web. I'm unsure if Trevor really knows about the OIR. Like from a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being he knows nothing, and 10 to he's the architect of the OIR, which he's not a 10, obviously. He took control of the OIR a while ago, I guess. So he's not a 10. But like Alice, Sam, and Celia believe he's at a 0, specifically because he went up to Sam and was like, "How are the accidents going?" And Lena had to correct him. It sounds like he was being fake about it, and that makes them think that he doesn't know anything. But I feel like he's like on like a 6 because he knows about the subcontractors, the externals, and his focus is more on like Gwen asks like, "Do you know who the subcontractor is?" And he like turns to her and he's like, "I'm sorry, do you hire other murderers as your subcontractors?" But that feels odd in a way because he's not confused as to why the external was implicated in murder, because he's just focusing on wanting to not draw attention to the OIR. He just wants the power, and that's why it feels like a 6 to me, because it's like, okay, someone that you contracted killed somebody, and we found that out. Do better. And the two bodies were killed by Ink Five-O, and it was the man being tattooed at the beginning, where in episode 20, Social Stigma, where Gwen finds Ink Five-O tattooing a person in a warehouse, and then it's the man eviscerated by barbed wire that he had tattoos of barbed wire, and Ink Five-O made them turn real, I guess, and eviscerate him as well. Those are the people dead. I was writing about back and I was like, wait, there's only one person who died. But no, it was the second. I remember now, the second person was the first person who's just a corpse there. But yes. And like, if you follow the trail of information, like he says, the person who gave the contract should be fired. Lena would fire Gwen. And there's also him saying that like you should fire the person who did that, or otherwise, and leave it up to your discretion, to Lena. So it's separate from firing, like do something else with them if you're not going to fire them. And that feels more like he knows something, which is why he's at a 6 for me right now in terms of knowledge. Because he says either fire them or I'll leave it up to your discretion. So he knows that Lena's doing something. I don't know. I don't really know. But it's really fun to note that at least he hid his knowledge from Alice, Sam, and Celia, because they still think he's at a 0. I kind of alluded to in how I was reading it out, but like Sam sounds incredibly entitled, telling Celia that he can't get close to her if she keeps secrets. I had a very visceral reaction hearing that, and I was like, shut up. Shut up. That's not how you talk to a woman, first of all. And he keeps saying it's not his business to know what her past is, but really sounds like he wants to know. And I'm like, that's not, I don't, that's not very kind of you, Sam, to like push that on her, because this was after the moment that Alice made a joke about like, yeah, your mysterious past, and Celia was like, because she doesn't tell them about her past, and it's like there's a reason. We know metatextually there's a reason. uh Sam and Alice sort of just see Celia as like a normal woman. Woman, she is a normal woman, but normal woman with like a normal quote unquote past, maybe some sort of traumatic past. I mean, Celia told Sam that she has a complicated immigration status, but it's so entitled of Sam to be like, mm, we just had sex and I want a relationship with you, but I can't be in a relationship with you if you keep hiding stuff from me. And I'm like, you are so young. You are so immature for that. And I will admit, it's very fair. It's very fair with what he's saying. Yeah, it's very fair for him not want to continue if he can't know more. But the way that he says it feels very entitled, and I feel like he should uh, lay off. Lay off of my girl. Okay? Okay. And overall, I do just think that Celia is waiting to see if she should uh, tell Sam about what she's doing. And I can't help but feel, because of how immature he is, that either one, he will not believe her, or two, when she tells him, and I feel like she's not telling him because she doesn't want him to be in the line of danger. If she tells him, I feel like he could say, why did you tell me all of this? Now I'm in danger. And that's sort of why she's hesitant about it. So the dossier that Gwen gave to Trevor, she got from the gibberish email she got last episode, and I was right that it was about the OIAR and not pertinent to the survival in terms of the externals. It is specifically about Lena. Again, this is Gwen taking steps to attempt to oust Lena from the OIAR. She wants her job, and she thinks she could do a better job. I don't think she can do a better job, but I love to see her try. And she's using her name, like Bouchard, to throw her weight around, to get information, to get power. And I love that. I love that for her. Just a little funny moment note that I put down. Before he was interested, Trevor says to Gwen to call his office number if she wants to contact him. And after he's interested, after she tells him that Lena's lying, Trevor tells Gwen to call his direct number and that he's never in his office. So, sort of showing his hand that he never intended for him to listen to what she said in general. But after he got interested, he was like, actually, yes, here's how you actually get in contact with me. I thought that was smart writing. I screamed when Sam began intoning because he was just talking normally, and then he says, the first time I heard the Magnus Archives was when my parents told me about it. I was like, ah, my God. Listen, as much as I say, as much as I rag on him for being immature with Celia and relationships, I still care for the boy because he's young. So, scary that he's being intoned by the archivist. These notes tend to be, the next few notes tend to be like out of order because it's just trying to fire off things as I was writing stuff down. Dr. Welling was seen prior in episode 21, Breaking Ground, as the head researcher who was spearheading the Magnus Institute's want to do their grand ritual within the Millennium Experience. And that's when Kenning was like, don't do that. And episode 17, Saved Copy, like I said last episode, that he established the Mutua Materia Research Center research program that was heard from in that statement case. And yes, that's the same Dr. Welling. I predicted this. The pair of women that Sam sees is interrogated by, they seem important to me. They're mentioned, they're asking him questions in a pair of women. I would excuse it if it was like a group, if it was like 3 or 4, but a pair, that feels important to me. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it does. It does feel important. The entities. Uh, well, I wrote flesh down first, which is why it's the first one in my notes, but I'll talk about both of them right now. I wrote flesh and eye. Flesh, it's because there's a focus on bodies and bone and meat. I can't help but think about the episode when it was episode 80 when Jurgen is telling John about what does the bones mean. Is it the messy body, or is it the death or stuff like that? Focus on the meanings of what they're seeing. And so I'm trying to focus on the meanings. But with the bones and the meat and the bodies, there's no focus on that. It's just a thing that is happening that is part of the horror. There's no focus on the fear or horror of meat or whatever, or like how meat is malleable. It's specifically just the bone escaping. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it's the flesh to me. Motifs that we've seen prior, uh, this just doesn't feel that similar. I might be wrong, and it might actually be flesh because it's about bone. But it just doesn't feel right to me, and it just feels more and more alchemical. And because we've talked about so much of alchemy and stuff like that, and I read about the great work, and I even tried to see if I could attach the events of this episode to like the 14 steps of the great work to create the Philosopher's Stone. I don't know anything about alchemy, and I don't want to start jumping through hoops. So there's definite idea that the fears entities, the cosmic beings that are in the world, are definitely doing something hand to hand with the alchemical, and the alchemical might be something else as well. And also the eye, obviously with the archivist uh, pulling that statement from him, but also this idea that he can still see the skulls behind the faces of his family. And that feels to me like a residual runoff from what he experienced, where he could see now the skulls of his family. And I assume that it's not a thing that lingers, because he doesn't mention anything about that, but he might not even pay attention to it subconsciously. It could be that he is just a witness of the horror, and that feels I as well, being like fear of having to see something that you don't want to, etc., etc. But yes, I can't. It's really hard to attach any entities to this episode, and unlike other episodes where it's kind of hard to attach, I'm okay with it because it feels more alchemical than cosmic. The yellow light, he kept talking about yellow light within the room. It sounds familiar to me, and I want to say it's similar to the light from the dog tree in 19 Hard Reset, but I'm not fully sure because there's definitely light there in the dog tree, but it seemed more to be radiant light, bright white light. That it was. I think it was also mentioned that there's multiple colors there too. So I don't know, just the light is very familiar, at least to me, and I wanted to note that down just in case. It seems this is similar to a ritual happening because we heard what's his face Jonah Magnus talk about how it was possible for individual endeavors to have they transmutation. It's in the notes here. It's transmutation. Transmutation itself is in the notes, the description of the episode. And so Jonah saying that only individuals were able to do transmutation sounds like that's what Dr. Welling was trying to do, transmutation upon the body. And it seems to have just been interrupted, the title of the episode, and backfired. So, like, my question, of course, is like, what are the purpose of the naked person? Perhaps is to have their skeleton have been rip out instead of what happened to Dr. Welling, in terms of like he was trying to make the skeleton in the body get out and it just backfired on him, so his skeleton ripped out. Transmutation. Did he die from that though? That's a good question. I think he did. Wait, when did this happen? So this episode happened the event happened August 17th, 1998. And breaking ground, the letter that Jennings sent was January 4th, 1998, and that is he mentioned Wellings alive then, and now Wellings might be dead after this moment. Who knows? I don't know. I want to know more about Dr. Wellings. He seems very compelling. But yes, I think he was trying to transmute the skeleton out of the human corpse. But when Sam interrupted, similar to how like other rituals within the Magnus archives have rituals that were interrupted. Transmutation is just rituals. Transmutation is just rituals to bring in the entities. What? That's an interesting thought. Okay, I don't know what to make of this. Obviously, we have so little information, and I'm just pulling at straws right now, trying to figure this out. But yes, yeah. So I've been editing this clip literally like a few hours after I recorded it, and I've been ruminating on this revelation that I had all of a sudden. Like I cooked, I ate, relaxed a bit, started editing it, and I was able to think more about this idea that like the personal endeavors that Jonah Magnus talks about in 27 Driven, and the transmutation things that keep reoccurring, that we keep seeing within these episodes. And I started thinking, I think what it is, part of it maybe would make sense to me. It is what it says on the till. Personal endeavors and the grand ritual, transmutation, etc., is analogous to simply just avatar apotheosis and the fear rituals, right? Because he keeps talking about like personal endeavors and like how individuals were able to do something, but they haven't been able to do it in a grand scale. And if you sort of like think about it, having one person do something, have something appear, but not be able to do a grand scale thing, I can connect it to someone who is an avatar becoming an avatar of the fear, but not being able to allow for the world to become an avatar of the fear itself, right? So if we can draw like a comparison, Peter Lucas would have quote unquote a personal endeavor to become an avatar of the lonely, and the silence is his grand ritual for the silence to appear, right? We connect that is after apotheosis and the personal endeavor, and the grand ritual is just a fear ritual. And it still does not help try to like figure out what's happening with Dr. Welling, but it definitely feels like the Magnus Institute is focused on more than just the eye, if there is SMERCH 14, or at least imposing the SMERCH 14 framework into this moment. The Magnus Institute is not focused on just the eye, and seems to be focused on other things. And two, it seems like they're going through this through alchemical means over supernatural means, because Jonah Magnus did notice that the growler was supernatural, and he was like, maybe it's not chemical, maybe it's supernatural, and that means they had in their mind the two different ways. And so I feel like the Magnus Institute is focusing on an alchemical way to become an avatar without courting the fears. It seems to be forcing the fears or forcing the entities to give them power. And their grand ritual is to force the entities to come into the world. And it's not like the entities don't want to come into the world, but it's definitely that they are not ready for it. And I feel like that's also why it's not working for them, because they're not prepping the world sufficiently for it. Because the avatars are trying to do that, but the institute and the alchemical work that they're doing, it just seems to be forcing stuff that they don't want to, and that also aligns with alchemical thoughts of like creating something from something else, and forcing something is gonna do bad. So I don't know, that's just ruminations in my head that come from that one moment of the personal endeavors. The rituals are just the same thing happening, just different worded. And yeah, take what you will from that. Finally, what does Sam want to find? I think because at the end of it, he's like, and now I'm going back to find to find. He passes out. But I don't know if it's like he is trying to find more information, find out why. I'm not fully sure. I don't know what to make of him saying he wants to find. I don't know what he wants to find. And the fact that he was not able to say what he wants to find is, I blame you, Johnny Sims, writer of the Magnus Archives and Magnus Protocol. I blame you for making me insane like this. But yes, that is the last episode of this crop. I will put this video out soon, and next 2 episodes, 29 and 30, semi-final and then final. Wait, no, that's competitions. Pre-finale and finale. That's it. Whatever. I will put those out as 2 episodes instead of 4, and I feel that sounds right, specifically because these next 2 episodes are probably gonna be heavy. So if you got this far, thank you so much. Please like and subscribe and share with your friends. Making these videos helps me a lot, and I know that some people have expressed their gratitude for these videos, and I feel so honored to hear that as well. And so I would love to hear from more of you as to how you felt about these last 4 episodes, these last few revelations, how the cases are going, etc., etc. So yes, stay away from evil tape recorders, and I will see you all later.